We don't have a booth or anything as ClinGen this year, but definitely if you see anyone from ClinGen, either of the sort of the core staff members that you're seeing on lots of calls or volunteers, like always pop past and say hello. We love to meet people face to face. But with that, let's get into the meeting for today. So we'll meet again as part of the Biocurator Working Group series at the end of the month on March 27th. But today we have Jill Savatt and Caitlin Cooney joining us to give us an update on GenomeConnect. So I will hand over to Jules and Caitlin.
Thanks, Alicia. I'll go ahead and share my slides. Thanks so much for having us today on this call. We're really excited to give a bit of an update about GenomeConnect. Caitlin and I are both genetic counselors by training and sit at Geisinger as some of the staff on GenomeConnect and on ClinGen. Can I just get a confirmation? You're seeing my wrong screen, aren't you? Oh, the joy. Sorry that I have failed. Let me go ahead and share the other one. Okay. Hopefully, that's now my correct screen and presenter view. Can Caitlin, you give me a nod? Thank you so much. So some of you may be aware of GenomeConnect, but since many of you are involved in curation activities within ClinGen, Caitlin and I thought we would start with a bit of an overview just to level set, share a little bit about GenomeConnect, what we do. We'll talk a little bit about using GenomeConnect in your curation efforts. And then Caitlin, I'll turn it over to her to talk a little bit about how we share updates back with participants and how your curation efforts can actually prompt that. So really a nice little loop today of GenomeConnect, what is it? What data do we have? How can you use that? And then how is that useful to us within GenomeConnect if you're using our data? So I think you all are very well versed in this graphic that summarizes many of the pieces of the ClinGen resource and the overall goal of ClinGen to create that centralized resource that defines the relevance of genes and variants. What you may also appreciate on this little graphic is there's a little place up here where patients are involved in this process. So I'm sure you know from your curation activities that the more genetic and health information that we can aggregate, pull together, the better we are able to curate genes and variants. And I think oftentimes in our curation activities, we're relying on the published literature, on publicly available data sets, resources. But ClinGen early on in the process thought that patients also could be a valuable source of information to drive our understanding forward. And that's where GenomeConnect comes into things. So in 2014, the ClinGen team launched GenomeConnect as a patient registry where individuals who had undergone genetic testing, regardless of diagnosis, regardless of reason for their testing, regardless of types of results, could opt to enroll and share their genetic and health information. The consent is governed by Geisinger's IRB, and individuals sign up online and are consenting to providing their genetic and health data, having that information shared with databases, with curation activities, and are consenting to recontact over time for additional information from us. Really, the thought behind GenomeConnect was that, of course, labs, researchers, and clinicians are collecting and sharing genetic and health information, but patients potentially could be an additional source of information, and in particular, could be a source of more detailed information that might not just be available from those other resources. So after coming in, participants provide their genetic and health data. Health data are provided via surveys that they complete within their account, and their genetic test report is uploaded so that our team can review it. Those health surveys really start with one that's like a review of systems, kind of goes from head to toe, asking about general issues kind of across the body. So do you have concerns with your heart, with your digestive system? And then whatever the participant says yes to, they then are asked more questions, trying to drill down on the phenotype a bit further. So maybe they say, yes, my child has an issue with their heart. And then they can tell us, was that a congenital heart defect? Is that an arrhythmia? So on. We then assign additional sub-surveys to drill down even further. You can see a list of those sub-surveys on the side of the screen here. So perhaps someone told us that their child had a heart defect on that initial survey. We then have a heart defect sub-survey to collect more information about the type of heart defect, the treatment that they might have had, if they had other congenital anomalies, birth defects, birth differences. And then, of course, we can recontact participants over time to collect more information if we develop new surveys. So perhaps it would be really useful to know, has this participant had a brain MRI? That's something that we can always reach out to them and ask via email. On the back end, those health survey responses are mapped to HPO terms, enabling structured data sharing of those health details. And then in terms of the genetic data, as I said, participants are just asked to upload a copy of their report. That report is then reviewed by our genetic counseling and genetic counseling assistant team to pull out all of the pieces of information that we would need in a structured form. So rather than asking a family or an individual to enter transcript, gene, cDNA, our team does that, pulls it off of the report. We're not classifying variants independently. We're not curating variants in the way that you all do in your expert panels, but really are pulling out the information as it appears on the genetic test report. Those information are then de-identified and shared. In particular, the main place where we share data is with ClinVar. And we share data in a way that is unique to patient registry. So it's called a phenotyping only submission to really acknowledge that we are not classifying that variant, but we're sharing those additional phenotypic details, additional information about inheritance if we have it, to put that out into the database. So you all are likely familiar with ClinVar, but just to show you what our submissions look like. So, when you search a variant in ClinVar, the top portion kind of summarizes the variant, various nomenclature. And then if you scroll down, there is where you will find the submissions. GenomeConnect submissions, because we're not classifying the variant, we're using that phenotype only submission, are always at the bottom. And you'll see that we have not provided for our classification and that our submissions don't contribute to the aggregate classification. You will see some other things that are unique to our submission if you click on the additional details piece. One that you'll see before clicking that is if we know the inheritance of the variant, we always submit that. And then from there, you can see additional details about the GenomeConnect participant. In this case, all of the features that they said yes to on their health surveys. The indication for testing, their age, the laboratory that completed the testing, the report date, and how they classified that variant. So all of the information as it appears on the report, along with that health information from the participants' health surveys, are shared. And really, we think that this is useful to provide additional details. Like in this case, you can see that GeneDx also has shared the variant, but we're able to provide the inheritance in this case, those additional clinical features, and in some cases might be able to provide variants that aren't otherwise in ClinVar. We also submit variants from a subset of our participants to Matchmaker Exchange via one of the connected nodes gene matcher. The subset of variants that we submit here are our candidate genes, or those that are reported as genes of uncertain significance, ones that do not yet have a gene-disease relationship. We submit them here really to try to enable connections with other healthcare providers, labs that are exploring those genes in hopes of being a part of the process that move them from candidate to disease-associated or not associated with Mendelian disease. So another place where our data are deposited in an effort to try and advance our understanding. So GenomeConnect, as I mentioned, was launched in 2014. So we've had our 10th birthday. But we acknowledged early on that we didn't want to, we're not intending to be the only registry out there. And we know that there are numbers of gene condition-specific registries that are collecting really valuable genetic and health data, but they might not be sharing it publicly with ClinVar, with other resources. And so in 2018, we created what we call our patient data sharing program, which really is the arm of GenomeConnect that works with other research groups, registries, to try and help them share data. So rather than saying, if you have a specific registry for your community, rather than saying, great, we want those participants to also enroll in GenomeConnect, we've worked with groups on a case-by-case basis to say, great, how can we help you share with ClinVar? Are there additional consents you might need? Do you need help formatting submissions to ClinVar? Do you need help reviewing genetic test reports? Or can we share what we've learned and how to do that with your registry team? And there are a couple of examples of groups that we work with, two that'll come up on later slides, the Brain Gene Registry and Association for Creatine Deficiencies Creatine Info Registry as just two examples. So we not only engage individual patients through GenomeConnect, but we also work with other registries, all with the goal of sharing patient-provided information with ClinVar. And I'm happy to share that as of the end of last year, we have engaged more than 11,000 participants in data sharing through those efforts. At one time or another, have worked with 10 external registries to submit to ClinVar and have shared nearly 5,000 variants with ClinVar from our participants. To just give you a snapshot of where we are. So now transitioning into how GenomeConnect could be used within curation activities. So I've alluded a couple of times throughout talking about GenomeConnect broadly that one of our main goals was to collect more detailed information from patients, case level information. And that's certainly been the case in our 10 years. We've seen that the information that we're collecting, such as additional phenotypes, inheritance, often goes above and beyond what labs are able to submit to ClinVar or might be able to share. Also, our ability to recontact patients over time has been really valuable. Perhaps there's a age-based penetrance of a gene. Someone has testing earlier, and it could be really valuable to go back to them and ask, have you developed this phenotype? Has this been something that you're now seeing to maybe inform a gene-disease relationship or variant pathogenicity? And that's something that we have the ability to do as a patient registry that might not always be possible on the lab side of things. Or maybe there are family history questions that would be really useful. So all in all, we certainly see that we're collecting more detailed information, and that detailed information can be valuable for curation activities. We also, over our 10 years, have seen that about 30% of our ClinVar submissions are only in there because our GenomeConnect participant or that other registry participant has chosen to share data. So when we go to submit to ClinVar, it's not in there from the reporting lab or any other institution, really showing that patients are also providing genomic variants that aren't otherwise available in ClinVar. And of course, those can be particularly helpful as well in understanding gene-disease relationships, gene-disease validity, and variant pathogenicity. And this slide summarizes all that I just said, but in a different format. So really our sense and experience with GenomeConnect is patients are providing unpublished cases that aren't available in the literature or in ClinVar, and they're providing that case level detail that can be really useful. To show some of this in action, I have two examples, one from a gene curation group and one from a VSEP, to try and highlight how GenomeConnect cases participants can be used. I'll acknowledge that these slides aren't my own, but have been shared by collaborators, first Maya Chopra, and then Jenny Goldstein, who I think is on the call today. And Jenny, welcome you to chime in if I get anything wrong. So first up, in the example of gene curation, as I mentioned, one of the groups that we've worked with is the Brain Gene Registry, helping them collect data submitted to ClinVar. And really, we've tried to do that, thought about doing that to inform some of our intellectual disability autism gene curations. So Maya Chopra chairs the BGR Intellectual Disability Autism GSEP. And back in 2023, so a couple of years ago, that team was curating the ASH1L gene in relationship to autosomal dominant syndromic complex neurodevelopmental disorder. At the time of the curation, there were 9 de novo heterozygous variants and 9 probands across 6 publications. 7 of those were predicted loss of function, 2 missense variants. And in terms of phenotype, those probands had intellectual disability, global developmental delay, autism spectrum disorder, dysmorphic features, and then variable GU and skeletal anomalies. So at the time of curation, enough data to reach definitive. However, When we looked at the brain gene registry and the data that we were able to share, we noted a couple of things. So there were 2 probands who came from GenomeConnect in our work with previously unreported de novo truncating variants dating back to 2019 and 2020. So 2 additional variants that could be used in the curation. And I know, of course, at the time when we did the curation, we reached definitive just based on the published literature. But we thought to ourselves, gosh, if we had been curating this a couple of years ago, if we had these GenomeConnect cases in 2019 and 2020, that could have allowed us to reach definitive more quickly. We also, because of the health surveys that participants completed, saw some additional phenotypes and phenotypic features that hadn't been reported in those 6 publications, in particular ataxia, and then more of a neuropsychiatric phenotype presentation in the second participant. So really, we thought the inclusion of these clinically ascertained variants shared via GenomeConnect, they could have helped us reach definitive sooner. It's definitive now, all is well, but it also is allowing us to start to think about expanding the spectrum of phenotypes that we're seeing for this condition. And I just want to have a shout out to one of our genetic counseling assistants, Inica Cordova, who many of you might have interacted with previously on some of the curation panels, that she ultimately wrote this work up, and the ASH1L variants that were shared from GenomeConnect in the BGR. So all in all, in gene curation may give you additional cases, may give you additional variants, and may give you additional phenotypic information. So now moving on to the variant curation example, and again, thanks to Jenny Goldstein for these. If you know Jenny, you know that she's very involved in the creatine deficiencies VSEP, and that VSEP wanted to think about how to use patient-provided information from the Association for Creatine Deficiencies Registry that GenomeConnect also works with to share data with ClinVar. In their curation activity, they actually looked at variants in registry participants and thought about instances where additional data from that participant could inform their curation efforts. Ultimately, they requested additional information such as biochemical evidence from a number of participants with variants in the SLC6A8 gene, an X-linked condition, and then the GAMP gene, an autosomal recessive condition. And after requesting that information, the slide from Jenny summarizes in orange the additional pieces of evidence that they were able to apply within those curations based on information they received from the participant. So perhaps the participant sharing biochemical data or segregation information allowed them to include PP4 or upgrade PP4 or apply additional codes. So you can see those here, and I think really goes to those additional details that might not be available in the literature from labs that could be available from patients, though it might take some effort to recontact and get them, can be really valuable for variant curation as well. So thanks, Jenny, again, for sharing these slides and for doing this work to highlight how patient-provided data can be useful in variant curation. So data from GenomeConnect participants, I hope I've left you with, could be useful in your activities. So now we want to switch gears and talk a little bit about how our curation activities can feed back to our GenomeConnect participants. And for that, Caitlin, I'm going to turn it to you. I'm happy to continue to advance slides if that's okay. If you'd prefer we shift, I'm also happy with that.
You can share, because I know that you have downloaded them in case Google just decides to stop working for us. So I appreciate that. So one of the main benefits for participants to join GenomeConnect is there's an ability to possibly receive updates on your results. So moving to the next slide, we kind of know that clinical laboratories and healthcare providers, there's this kind of duty to assess genomic results and recontact patients, but who really does this job fall to? And there's no legal duty to recontact patients over time that has been established. And so this can kind of fall into this like murky area of like who is going to be recontacting patients, who's going to be reinforming patients if there have been any updates to their reports. And so We know that there are a lot of barriers to this process. So one is, reimbursement on the laboratory level is, they're not going to get reimbursed for this work. So how much time and effort and energy do they put into this process? And then the other side is patients move, they change providers. So even if this report goes to the provider, is the provider able to recontact at the patient? Are they able to get connected, go over, schedule an appointment to provide all that updates? So early on with GenomeConnect, we saw that we had this ability to, provide this information. We may learn about updates through our data sharing with ClinVar or GeneMatcher. And so can we be a resource to patients as another option for this information to be shared? Is there a way that we can go about doing this? So early on, we surveyed our patients and we said, what information would you like to learn? And are you comfortable learning that from a patient registry? And basically, overwhelmingly, 90% of the participants surveyed said, yeah, we want to know any possible update to our results. So that could be, a change in a classification from likely benign to benign, from likely pathogenic to pathogenic. So maybe changes that don't have direct impact on their care and management, but the participants say they wanted to hear it all. So what we have devised is this workflow for us to share these updates back with our participants. And so as we learn about any updates, we then reach out to the ordering laboratory to say, hey, this was reported in 2017. According to your most recent ClinVar submission, the classification has changed. Can we confirm that? And so we often try to recontact the laboratory. And then once we hear from the laboratory that that variant is indeed reclassified, we will then send that update to the participants. Again, this is a feature that participants consent into. So you can opt into getting updates or you can opt out of getting updates. In our update or in our email to participants saying in the update, it's pretty vague in terms of saying that there's a possible update regarding this specific gene. We really do encourage you to contact your ordering provider or find a local genetic counselor to kind of request an update from the laboratory, request an updated report. And then if the participant receives an updated report, we ask that they share it back with us so that we can update our ClinVar information as well. So to examples for this, we have some case examples from our registry. We have a patient who underwent sequencing back in 2015. This was more due to a different history that they had in their own clinical criteria. So this individual had a history of a prenatal cystic hygroma, which is a pocket of fluid behind the baby's neck that's usually measured on ultrasound. And so that could be a sign of an error in the lymphatic system. And then later on, they also noticed some behavior issues, fine motor delay, and some different features, dysmorphic features. When they had testing, they identified 2 variants in DHCR7. One variant was pathogenic, and one variant was classified as a variant of uncertain significance. DHCR7 is associated with an autosomal called Smith-Lindley-Opitz, which can have different facial features and behavior issues. But based on this result, there was not enough information to make a diagnosis, as there was one pathogenic and one VUS. So this family joined GenomeConnect. We went ahead and we shared this information with ClinVar. When we shared this information with ClinVar, we saw that that VUS had been reclassified to likely benign by the reporting laboratory. So we reached out to the laboratory, confirmed, yes, likely benign. We recontact the family to say, hey, this has been reclassified. This prompted them to connect with their doctor, and their doctor ended up ordering an exome reanalysis. And through that, they were able to identify a de novo VUS in a candidate gene that was associated with dysmorphic features, neurodevelopmental disorders, and cognitive anomalies, more aligned with the clinical presentation for that individual. So this is an example to show it's good and really useful to return any type of update. So a lot of times these updates from VUS to likely benign or VUS to benign are not prioritized because it's not going to really impact clinical management or care. But as you can see that this change then did prompt additional testing, or in this case, reanalysis, which could really then change the course and care management of an individual. So just highlighting that it's really can be beneficial to return any possible update in results, upgrades, or what we consider downgrades. To date, we have shared over 412 updates with our participants. About little under 19%, 18.8% have been updates of or that are would be considered medically relevant. So changing maybe a VUS to a likely path, or even in the opposite, we had some pathogenic variants and likely pathogenic variants reclassified as VUSs. So when I didn't do this work, so this goes out to everyone on GenomeConnect who previously did this work. We had done a survey of participants who had received these updates. And when we reached out to them and we did some structured interviews or semi-structured interviews, we learned that about 70% are not receiving these updates from their clinician or their testing laboratory. So they would not have been informed of this update unless GenomeConnect had reached out to them, and that prompted that individual to reconnect with their clinician. And we've also learned that a lot of participants are really happy with this process. 86% reported satisfaction with updates process. And they were, as we mentioned when we surveyed them in the beginning, they wanted updates of any kind. And so even if there are changes in the updates or multiple updates, they're pretty happy with the process. So curation efforts can prompt genetic updates. And so here are some more examples that we'd want to walk through in terms of how all of the work that you're doing helps us. So this is an example from a participant who had exome sequencing back in 2017. At that time, a variant in TAOK1 was detected, and it was reported as a variant of uncertain significance. So this gene was considered a candidate gene, a gene of uncertain significance. We submitted this to GeneMatcher, and we submitted to GeneMatcher in 2019, and then because of this connection, because of connecting with other people who have been studying this gene, studying its disease relationship, trying to connect other participants and other patients that have similar features with variants, we learned that there was a manuscript that was being published that exerted a relationship, a gene-disease relationship with TAOK1. Contacted the laboratory, and at that time, it still remained a gene of uncertain significance. Then in 2021, our own GCEP, the ID Autism GCEP, curated this gene, and they classified this as having a definitive gene-disease relationship. Now we went back to the laboratory and we said, hey, our GCEP recently has a definitive gene-disease relationship. Have you relooked at this gene? What do you think at this point? They agreed that TAOK1 has a definitive gene-disease relationship with disease, and that specific variant in that individual was considered pathogenic, which was an update that we were able to return to our participant. This is a more recent update. In fact, I just gave this update to the participant last month. So we had a participant who had a hereditary cancer testing panel in 2022. On the report, the pathogenic variant in CHEK2 was identified, and a variant of uncertain significance in CDH1 was identified. We submitted both variants to ClinVar. Following up on the submission, we had identified that the CDH1 variant had been reclassified as likely benign by ClinGen CDH1 VSEPT. So we had reached out to the laboratory that did the testing and asked what is their current classification for the CDH1 variant. They informed us that they only relook at variants if it's a request from the ordering provider. Therefore, they would not be willing to provide that information to a patient registry. We decided, okay, thank you, totally understand your process, and reached out to the VSEP just to confirm that they still felt confident with this likely benign classification. And they did, and they felt comfortable. And so then we reached out to the participants about this possible report update, and we are encouraging the participant to connect with their provider so their provider can reach out directly to the laboratory in hopes of getting an updated report for them. So when might we reach out to you guys? And so this is really when does GenomeConnect lean on, use all of the fabulous experts that ClinGen has. So we may request different GSEPs to re-review the gene-disease relationships. So prior to submitting candidate genes from a laboratory report to GeneMatcher, sorry, there was a typo, we briefly review the available information. And if we see any conflicting classification, say that there's a conflicting classification between the ClinGen's classification and GenCC's classification, we will ask the GSEP to re-review that gene to see should we still submit this to GeneMatcher, or is there actually a gene disease relationship update that we can perhaps provide back to the participants. As I just reviewed in that CDH1, some laboratories will only re-review or reclassify variants if the request comes from an ordering provider. So sometimes we will reach out to the VSEP to just confirm that that classification they have in ClinVar is the most up to date. As we have seen in the changing environment, some laboratories are going out of business. Therefore, I can't recontact those laboratories. So sometimes it would be nice to just run it by VSEP again to confirm that it's the most recent and current classification. And then another time that we could reach out to a VSEP is if we see that a classification is not consistent with a report, especially if the laboratory has a more recent classification. So say I see that GeneDx classified this variant as pathogenic in March of 2025, and the VSEP had a classification of, variant of uncertain significance in, March of 2020. We may then reach out to say, hey, this is time to re-review it. What do you think about the new information at this time? So how to get involved in GenomeConnect. And there's many different ways, and we hope that some of you take advantage of these. So one way is just to kind of engage participants in data sharing, inform patients or participants that they too can share their own genetic and health data. So if you work with patients, inform them about the opportunity to share data through GenomeConnect. If you work for a laboratory, consider adding wording about GenomeConnect to your laboratory reports. There is a link that has some of our sample laboratories, but some common laboratories do have a little blurb about GenomeConnect. We do see a large number of our participants do come through and register because they have received that information on their lab reports, or because their genetic counselors, genetic providers have told them about GenomeConnect. If in the future you work with a patient registry, discuss the opportunity to engage with GenomeConnect to share data. As we've said, we have worked with over 10 registries throughout GenomeConnect's history. Sorry, thank you, Jules. We know that using this in the data can be really helpful to inform our understanding of the relationship between genes, variants, and health. We also know that variant information from GenomeConnect participants or other registry data submitted to ClinVar can be periodically. So we do see that we are not always what I would call up to date with our submissions. So you can always reach out to us if you have a question about a variant, if you're looking for more information about the phenotype for the participant, or if maybe there are additional participants in GenomeConnect registry with variants in that gene. So we have built a tool on the ClinGen website to search or to help facilitate searching to see if there are any GenomeConnect participants with variants in a gene of interest. And so on the main ClinGen webpage, using that main search bar that I'm sure we have all used 100 times, you can search for the gene. And then if you select the curated gene green button, you can see, the curation details for that gene. On that page, there should be a tab if there are any variants that have been shared by GenomeConnect participants. You will see GenomeConnect and then a number in a circle. So for ASH1L, there are 7 GenomeConnect participants with variants in that gene. If you select that GenomeConnect tab, that blue will be a hyperlink, takes you to the page on the right. This just provides a little bit of information about GenomeConnect. And if you click here to view, this will take you to the ClinVar search page that has a list of all the variants. So you can see, are any of these of interest to you? As we mentioned, that we do sometimes have additional case level data, or if you have specific questions like, did this patient have a brain MRI? Feel free to email info@genomeconnect.org. As we mentioned, we do have the ability to recontact participants over time, so we can reach out to them, get that information. On the right-hand side of your screen is a video tutorial on searching GenomeConnect. So I just gave you a quick summary instructions of it. We did create a video that goes step-by-step of how to search ClinGen to see if GenomeConnect participants, if there are GenomeConnect participants with variants in that gene of interest. So Jules has been so great, and she prepared a Google Sheet to highlight GenomeConnect participants who could be relevant for different curation efforts. So there's a VSEP sheet and a GSEP sheet. So that would just be, if you guys use that QR code, we'll be able to get to that document, and you'll be able to see the different that we have participants in those different genes, or with participants with variants in those specific. Sorry.
Yeah, this is a snapshot in time. It's not something that we continuously prepare, but we wanted to bring this today because we thought it could be useful for those who might just be curious of, do you have variants in the genes that our VSEP is curating, or GSEP-wise? Do you have cases that could be useful for genes that have already been curated, in particular with moderate or lower classification? So that's really the focus snapshot of just today. The VSEP sheet just includes counts of probands with variants that correspond to VSEPs, and then GSEP contains, if your GSEP has published a curation with moderate, limited, or no known disease relationship curations, corresponding proband counts. So in addition to the great website search, if you're just kind of curious, want to poke around, the Google Sheet could be another resource for you as well, but not something we update regularly, just for today.
And this is a little bit of a tutorial. So GenomeConnect cases can be entered into the GCI as evidence. And so when you go to add new evidence score, the information that you would pull in is that VCV number and the SCV number. And so that would be how you would be able to enter in the GenomeConnect information so that it can be scored when you're doing the GSEP review, or the review of the gene, sorry. So a quick summary, GenomeConnect offers a structured way for patients to share genotype and phenotype data. We are open to all individuals that have had genetic testing, and therefore we know that and have seen that participants are an important source of novel genetic data and phenotypic data. And this information can really be used to inform of understanding of genetics in various efforts, including with the ClinGen gene and variant curation efforts. Lastly, individuals engaged in data sharing can remain informed about their results. They can learn about additional research studies through GenomeConnect. Again, that's a benefit that we provide our participants. We'll reach out to them if we learn about available research studies that they are eligible for. We previously had and are currently rebuilding a participant match feature, which allows individuals to connect with other families or other individuals based on gene, which can be really important for especially for those very rare conditions or rare gene findings where there might not be a large community support that has already been built for them. So I have briefly talked about some of the amazing work done by other people. So this is just acknowledgement that this work is done by a number of people. So thank you to everyone on the GenomeConnect team.
So with that, I think, Alicia, we're happy to take questions. If there are any questions, I'll get that Google Sheet link in the chat as soon as I stop sharing. But yeah, if anyone has questions, we're happy to try and answer them.
There wasn't any questions in the chat throughout the presentation, so I don't know if anyone has live questions for now. So I was going to ask one question when you were talking, Jules, but then you've answered it already. I was going to say, like, it's great to see all these examples of how the GenomeConnect registry has been able to help ClinGen in their curations. And I was like, oh, well, like, what's the best way for a GSEP or a VSEP to connect with GenomeConnect in sort of a, not a formal way, but like a more structured way than just randomly messaging you. But then you've answered that already. And thank you so much for putting together that sort of snapshot Google Sheet of the VSEPs or GSEPs that should take a closer look and perhaps consider to reaching out to your team and having more of a formal connection there. But if there's not any questions, I think people can have a few minutes back to their day. But thank you both so much for that wonderful overview. And it's really cool to see that synergistic relationship that GenomeConnect has with ClinGen. It's not only helping ClinGen with gene and variant curation and moving either variants to pathogenic or benign or genes to a more definitive status, but then that same information that patients are providing can get fed back to them and change their individual classifications and have a meaningful impact for them. So really, really cool to see.
Thanks for letting us come share a little bit about what we do and that nice little bidirectional loop. So if you have questions after today, don't hesitate to reach out. That general email goes to Caitlin and myself. So you're not like emailing the void, you're emailing us if you do have questions. Thanks all.
Thank you. If not, I'll hopefully see some people at ACMG next week, and otherwise we'll see you back here on the 27th of March. Bye.